This is TWiT.
What we know is that Apple and Google have engineers, crypto people, have gotten together and designed something which they are immediately implementing. I think they're working, both of them, on putting this into APIs on their respective platforms, to which applications can be written. But they've also said that because they recognize that the potential need for contact tracing is not going away anytime soon, they intend to, as soon as they can, submerge this technology into the underlying OS. So contact tracing with this design will be part of both iOS and Android moving forward. So what I want to do is first explain exactly what the technology is, exactly how it works, and then, Leo, you and I will discuss, the implications and upsides and downsides and spoofing and all the other things. Okay, so and I should just mention that even when this is submerged into the phone, this is it's interesting. Notice it's not contact tracking. It's because I'm sure tracking is a bad word. It's contact tracing. So, but even so, I'm sure there will be a setting to turn it off if you don't want that feature on in your iOS or Android device. So all of this is explicitly opt-in, and if the user chooses to participate in this. And I was listening to you talk about this in MacBreak Weekly and agreeing that this potentially offers enough collective benefit, and I think we will see from the technology that they have really dealt with the arguments that uninformed people have, that this makes a lot of sense. Okay, so when contact tracing is first brought up on a device, iOS, Android, whatever, and you're right, Leo, for people who don't have smartphones, it would be entirely possible to have a little credit card size puck of some sort, which is only a Bluetooth beacon thing, to have like some lower cost alternative if there was some reason to do that. So you could certainly do that. So each instance synthesizes from high entropy a single master tracing key. So it's a 256-bit master ID for the device. There's only one of them. It is well protected, never a need for it to be changed. So each device has this single master key. From that, a tracing key. There's the master tracing key. From that, a daily tracing key, which is half the size, it's 128-bit, is deterministically derived from hashing the master tracing key with the Unix epoch day number, which we know is the number of days since January 1st, 1970. So this tracing key, the daily tracing key, changes every day, once per day, and it's derived from the master tracing key. But because the daily tracing key is the output of an HMAC-based key derivation function, the master tracing key is never revealed, and the daily sequence of daily tracing keys cannot be predicted. So, however, as we'll see, and this is important, the device that contains the master tracing key can itself because it alone has the master tracing key. It can recreate any previous day's daily tracing keys that it may choose to, and we'll see why that's important here in a second. Okay. If the user of the device should subsequently test positive for COVID-19, the user can instruct the device to upload to a regional health server a block of previous days' daily tracing keys for the period during which they may have been contagious. So we'll just sort of hold that thought for a second, because there's more we need to explain, but I wanted to explain where. So there's the master key. The master key is hashed with the day in order to produce a daily key, which because the day changes every day, that daily key changes every day. But the way this is designed, the way they designed it this way, is that if at some point, any point in the future, you were to test positive for COVID-19, you could say, oh, shoot. And you could upload to a shared server, and we'll talk about the way that's done in a second, the set of previous days' tracing keys. They don't reveal the master key. They're just the tracing keys that you had on earlier days. So the point is, because they are derived from the day number, you don't need to store those daily tracing keys. You can get them anytime you want. Okay, so we've got a daily tracing key. There is the thing that is actually transmitted in the Bluetooth beacon is called a rolling proximity identifier. Oh, and I forgot to mention, because this reminds me here again, the tracing key is half size. Remember, the master key is 256 bits. We want 256 bits for maximum entropy, so we don't get collisions among these randomly chosen tracing keys, because they're all just chosen independently. The daily tracing key is a compromise, because they do transact online. They need to be stored in a server, and the only real need is to avoid collisions. It's a half-size key, 128-bit key, which provides still plenty of entropy, but it was chopped in half just because there was no need there for 256 bits. Okay, so the rolling proximity identifier is also a half size, that is chopped in half. It's a 16-byte, 128-bit value sent out as the beacon from all participating devices. We've discussed several times in the past how to prevent Bluetooth tracking. All modern devices already randomize their Bluetooth MAC addresses. Those MAC addresses change on a random schedule between once every 10 to 20 minutes. So on average, every 15 minutes. But when you see 15 minutes, think of, well, yeah, but actually it's between 10 and 20 minutes. The device chooses a time period in the future between 10 and 20 minutes to next rotate or pick a new Bluetooth MAC address. The system's this rolling proximity identifier, which is a thing that is actually sent, it is changed synchronously with the MAC address changes. So the rolling proximity identifier changes with the MAC address. When the user has enabled contact tracing, every time their Bluetooth MAC address changes, a new rolling proximity identifier is generated. That's the actual data contained by the Bluetooth packet. Since the Bluetooth MAC address and the rolling proximity identifier change synchronously, what that means is that no single identifier will straddle MAC addresses, and no single MAC address will straddle identifiers. That means it's not possible to link and track contact tracing by MAC address or vice versa. The value of this 128-bit rolling proximity identifier is also fully deterministic, fully determined. It's derived from that daily tracing key and a 10-minute window number from the start of the day. So it's you take the number of seconds so far that you are into the day, divide that by the number of seconds in 10 minutes to get an integer, which is essentially the 10-minute interval that you're in. So that's something that will be changing every 10 minutes throughout the day. So everyone who's voluntarily participating in this contact tracing system is emitting 128-bit identifiers, which are ultimately derived from their master, that grandmaster 256-bit master tracing key, which in turn creates a daily tracing key based on the day of the epoch that we're all in together, the number of days since January 1st, 1970, which is then used, it's hashed along with the 10-minute window of the time of day to create a proximity, this rolling proximity identifier, which changes every 10 minutes. And this was cleverly done. They clearly did this on purpose. Notice that since the MAC address changes every 10 to 20 minutes, and the rolling proximity identifier is calculated on a 10-minute scale, no two sequential MAC addresses can ever have the same rolling proximity identifier. So this was carefully assembled to ensure privacy. Okay. So we have a system where participating devices are broadcasting an identifier which changes unpredictably from the outside once every 10 to 20 minutes. And again, because it changes with the MAC address and the MAC address interval is deliberately fuzzed, it's on an average of every 15 minutes. And every participating device is also collecting all of the similar incoming 128-bit rolling proximity identifiers from everyone nearby. You could also use, for example, the received signal strength identifier if you wanted to get some sense of the physical proximity of the two devices. So, for example, the API might say, well, yes, we received the beacon, but my God, the received signal strength is so low that that's probably further away than viral contamination could occur, so we're not going to bother with that one. So there might be a received signal strength threshold below which the beacons, even though they are received, they are ignored as just being, unlikely to actually represent the other person or you represent a threat to either of you. Okay, so if the device has not before seen the 128-bit rolling proximity identifier, it will be maintaining a list of them. So if it hasn't seen it, it will add it to the list. And since there's no need to retain previously received rolling proximity identifiers forever, they can be and will be deleted from the receiving devices after they've aged out at what I've seen written is 21 days. That could be changed to 28 or it could be whatever. But the point is you don't need to keep them forever. Okay, so now someone who's been participating tests positive for COVID-19. If they choose to, that is presumably at their discretion. Maybe they don't have a choice in China. I don't know. But here in the U.S., we probably still have a choice. At their discretion to help the world and to help protect their friends and family, they choose to notify everyone whom they may have been in contact with during the days prior to their diagnosis when presumably they were contagious. So they instruct their device to notify the world. Their device alone contains that single derived from pure entropy master tracing key, which, based upon the Unix epoch day, derives the daily tracing key. So the device goes back some number of days and uploads each day's tracing key during which time they may have been contagious. And in the process, we relabel these tracing keys diagnosis keys. Once they have been associated with a COVID-19 positive individual, they become diagnosis keys by definition. So think about this. All of the rolling proximity identifiers, which were emitted by that user's device on any given day, were derived solely from that daily tracing key and the time of day in those 10-minute windows. That means that anyone else who obtains those daily tracing keys, now called diagnosis keys, anyone who obtains those diagnosis keys is also able to rederive the same set of Bluetooth beacons that the COVID-19 positive user's device transmitted that day. So on the receiving end, every participating user's device periodically downloads all of the daily diagnosis keys, presumably from people in their region, because there's no reason to get them from countries you are not located in, and presumably only since you last downloaded them. So it might be a daily thing. You might tell the server, last time I checked in was this time and date. Give me any new diagnosis keys for where I am now or within some region that I haven't previously seen. For any new keys that the device has not already received, the user's device simply recreates the original rolling proximity identifiers, which were originally derived from the now believed to be infected user under their tracing key. They use what we now call the diagnosis key to recreate the same set of rolling proximity identifiers, and they check their list. Remember, they're storing all the ones that they've seen, so they look for a collision. That is, do any of the resynthesized rolling proximity indicators match any that were received during the last 21 days? If so, the person knows they have had a potential exposure to somebody who has since claimed that they are COVID-19 positive. They have no idea who. They have no idea when. Well, actually, they would know what day it was, and presumably their device might choose to tell them this was the day that a collision was found. So if there are any matches, the recipient user knows that someone whose device theirs was close enough to, presumably to exchange Bluetooth beacons and presumably with a high enough receive strength indication, has posted a diagnosis key that they received, a diagnosis key that generated a rolling indicator that they received that day. So that's the system. It is carefully thought out. I've gone through the spec. I've looked at the crypto. These guys didn't miss anything. And so that's the system that apparently without any modification, iOS and Android will both have in short order. We need applications, and we also need to do something about the things that can go wrong. So what can go wrong? Moxie Marlinspike, who has earned and deserved everyone's respect as a crypto-savvy researcher, he developed Signal and did a stunning job with Signal. It apparently, in some what I presume are an initial bunch of tweets, he got some things wrong. And I presume it's just because he didn't have time to sit down and read through the spec carefully. Because, for example, he was immediately worried about MAC address tracking, and the spec explicitly explains how that cannot happen. There is no fixed Bluetooth MAC address that can be associated with these tokens by design. He also talked about huge amounts of bandwidth being consumed. I assume that he was presuming that the tokens themselves are what would be transacted rather than the diagnosis keys. One of the cleverest things about this is that we have HMAC-based keying that only allows these things to be generated in a forward-going manner, and the diagnosis key, knowing the day, allows you to resynthesize all of the individual rolling keys. So anyway, these guys, from a crypto standpoint, they have produced a very powerful system. One non-malicious problem that could arise is that radio proximity does not perfectly match viral propagation proximity. In other words, the way I think of it is your device, for example, might be exchanging beacons with people in the apartment above, below, and to either side of yours, but that depending upon how well this received strength indication is used, assuming it is, that doesn't mean because you can receive their radio signal that they would represent a source of viral contagion. So the system could potentially false positive if you happen to have your phones on either side of a wall so that the signal strengths were strong, and somebody on the other side of the wall later came down with COVID-19.
What's the range of LE? It's less than regular Bluetooth, I would bet.
That's a really good question. I don't know. You're right.
It's low energy, so that sounds like it must be.
Yeah, we ought to. That's a really good point. I was just assuming it was the same 10 meters, thus 30 feet. But it may be that it is enough shorter that like you're already going to be need to be within sneezing distance in order to reach the other person. And of course, the other glitch is, and this is something I haven't read anything about, is you don't want people spoofing their COVID-19 infections onto the server. So, for example, you wouldn't want somebody going to a concert and spending the night, in proximity to as many people as they possibly could, and then misrepresenting the fact that they're now COVID-19 positive and causing a false positive alert to everyone. So we do. If nothing else, the Zoom fiasco has, the Zoom startup fiasco has shown that, the social engineering side also needs to have attention paid to it. We've nailed the technology side. So I don't know how we'll handle that. It needs to be done correctly, but we really do have a beautiful technical solution, I think. There's no notion of user identity. It's not encoded. It's not encrypted. It just isn't there. These things are coming out of a HMAC, and it's just random gibberish. there's no sense of location. That is the
so
protocol.
it's not related to. It's not. You can't derive the randomly generated MAC addresses from this HMAC. Now,
so
that was one of Moxie Marlinspike's concerns was and then all of a sudden, somebody tests positive, he's going to have, it's going to publish all of his rotating Bluetooth MAC addresses.
Well, so there's two different things here.
I know there's these derived ones.
Well, so there's the MAC address, and that's separate from the payload of the Bluetooth packet, the rolling proximity identifier.
Yeah.
That's the data contained by the Bluetooth packet.
But that has to be able to link back to the person who generated it at some point if you test positive.
Yes.
So you must be able
Correct.
to derive the MAC address from that.
Not the MAC address. You need to. The MAC address is different from the rolling proximity identifier.
Okay.
The MAC address is the communications link.
Right.
The rolling proximity identifier is the 128-bit tag carried by in the payload.
And that's generated randomly.
And that's generated through this HMAC, which is clever because it allows them to be recreated from the daily tracing key,
right?
Which is then called the diagnosis key.
But it's a one-way
Yeah, it is a one-way function. Okay. But you put the same thing in, you're going to get the same thing out, which is the elegance of this, because it means you just post your diagnosis keys, the keys for the days that you were contagious, and everybody who receives those can then regenerate the whole day's worth of rolling proximity identifiers to see if they have any collisions, if they have any matches.
So he says the moment you test positive, he misunderstood it. He says all of your BTLE MAC addresses over the previous period become linkable.
Yes,
that is not the case.
True.
Okay.
Yep, not the case.
That would certainly be an issue, obviously, because the reason you rotate them is because
it's also very clear that Apple and Google knew this because they deliberately made the 10-minute period on the inside of when the MAC address rotates,
right,
or changes. So there is just absolutely. Oh, and they also made them change synchronously, and the spec specifically says that. So I just think that Moxie, maybe he, I don't know, had a bad hair day. Well, you've seen him, so that's not much of a stretch. Who knows? But there is no MAC address linkability. They really nailed the technology. It's beautiful.
Right. Okay.
So we need to solve the social engineering problem. We need not to allow people to post to what will become an important tracing database if they aren't actually recently shown to be positive. But that could be under the control of local health officials and we don't yet know how they're going to be distributing or managing antibody testing. But the cool thing is you can't have tracing unless you have the technical foundation. To their credit, Apple and Google instantly stepped up and created as far as I can see, a perfect technology base for then on which can be built the tracing that we probably need throughout the world moving forward.